Okay, so my name is Ben Panter. I'm the founder and CEO of Blackford Analysis. We're delighted to have this opportunity to share some industry insights with the SIIM community. You'll know by now that the full version of this presentation is recorded and available online. So we're going to give you a very short overview, and then we're going to launch into a discussion panel hosted by Don Dennison. So you've got 10 minutes of me, and then we're going to switch into a Q&A with all the panelists. So we're talking about managing the post-COVID-19 imaging surge. And really, we feel that that's all about unlocking the potential of AI applications. One of the benefits of having a wide deployment is that we have platforms operating in all sorts of different environments and can aggregate that information together to understand what's happening across the whole of the US. We have platforms deployed in imaging centers, in rad groups, in large hospitals, and pretty much across the board, we've detected a 60% drop in volumes. In fact, if you look at our mini, we're not the only ones to have seen this. The estimate that across the US, the volume was down 50 to 55%. The thing is, though, that the need for much of that imaging hasn't gone away. If you're a patient and you're waiting for that imaging study and the results from that study, your need is even greater. Because not only do you know that something's wrong, you know that something has been wrong for a long time and you need something done about it. So really, all those studies aren't lost. They need to come back at some point. And actually, if you think about how we cover that dip, there's going to be an increase in demand for quite a long time because we can't cover all of that immediately. So we foresee that imaging will be at 110, 120% for perhaps 6 or even 12 months. And what that means for the average practice is that there's a huge amount of work to be done, and we need to help be ready for that. Okay, so we all have seen at RSNA and at SIIM the various different AI vendors, the various different AI algorithms, the potential that they have for unlocking all these different aspects of radiology. I think if you looked at RSNA last year, you'd have seen 130 different companies advertising AI products. And the real challenge is trying to work out which of those products is ready to help you in your practice today. First of all, we look at where we think that products can actually help deal with that post-COVID surge. So there are 3 real areas. One is reporting efficiency, and this is trying to get through the routine studies, but also add value for the downstream referrers who are also feeling the crunch and having a lot more work to do. So what can you do to improve reporting efficiency? Second question, what can you do to get more through your modalities? If you've got 6 CTs, 3 MRs, how are you going to be able to increase throughput through there because you don't have time to add another modality to the list? Then there's the question of, well, can we do something to help impact backlogs outside of radiology? Can we offer an alternative to an interventional procedure? Can we offer something that augments a surgical procedure that helps with preoperative planning or something like that? How can we challenge ourselves to look wider than radiology and help with the backlogs across the entirety of healthcare? So, all sorts of potential there, but there's a real problem. If you work in healthcare, you'll understand that the resources required to implement just one product are significant. You go through product evaluation cycles, product selection, IT approval, internal business case, legal and BA, purchase approval, hardware and infrastructure, deployment training. And this is before a radiologist has even looked at the output of that app. Now, no one application solves all of these different clinical needs. So really, we're going to have to build an ensemble of applications that help us tackle that surge of imaging volume. The challenge is that if we do those in serial, because they all take resource to be able to implement, we're looking at perhaps 9 months per application. If we're doing 4 of those, well, that's 3 years. And there's a problem here because we don't have 3 years to deal with that post-COVID surge. So there has to be a way to try and do this work in parallel, not in series. And the approach there is to use a platform. I think that platforms are becoming more and more familiar in our industry. And really, the aim of a platform is to help with selecting, procuring, deploying, and supporting these applications, and finding a single place where you can bring all of these different clinical applications together, deliver them through a common architecture, both technical and commercial and legal, and make sure that the RADs are actually able to use them straight away rather than having to learn new interfaces, all that kind of thing. Won't surprise you that Blackford Platform is exactly that kind of approach. We bring together a curated marketplace of regulatory cleared medical imaging applications, and we allow those to then be deployed within your facility using your existing workflow and deliver that value. So how do we do this? Well, we have a 5-step approach. First step is really to understand you. Every site is different. Every case mix is different. We look at your current case mix, but we also have the technology to look into your referrers and see whether there are opportunities for imaging that you might not be fully realizing right now. We then look at that case mix and we suggest a suite of applications that could help you really tackle some pieces there. We then develop with you a customized business case that reflects the applications and the site. We recognize that although we have a good knowledge of all of our partner applications, we're not always the experts, and we're very open to bringing in our ClinApp partners, and you'll get to meet some of those in a moment, really for a deeper dive on any of the clinical aspects of their products. We never want to get between you and the person that's delivering this product. We just want to make sure that we facilitate all of that process. And then the 4th step is really understanding your existing infrastructure and workflow and determining the optimal integration paths. The key message here is that we seek to augment your existing systems and workflow rather than trying to replace them en masse. We recognize that you do what you do because it's the most efficient way you can do it at the moment, and we need to integrate with that rather than force you to integrate with us. Then step 5, develop a rollout program to streamline training, adoption, and effective use of these. We recognize that for us to be successful, you have to be successful with these products, and we're very much bought into making that happen. Okay, so let me just talk about a few elements of that offering. The first is the curated marketplace. Now, as I said to you before, there are 130 application vendors out there. There's about 50 products that have a 510K. There's probably about 20 that have real sales traction in the US, that have products that have really concrete value propositions and are being used and being productive in the US healthcare market. What we've done is we've really focused down on areas like clinical relevance, clinical value, regulatory approval, read them on the slide there, really to try and do that product evaluation and vetting to make sure that the apps that we're putting forward to you are ready, that they're going to have a noticeable impact on the practice. We recognize that there are other ways to experiment with kind of very new raw technology, but we're trying to focus on the tools that are really ready for production use immediately. We also recognize that you don't want a black box that sits somewhere and does nothing except for process data. If you want to really get value out of AI, it needs to be integrated at every step in the workflow. So at the modality stage, being able to understand that an AI tool exists and that you want to do something with it. The processing has to be incredibly efficient. You need to make sure that you're prefetching studies wherever possible. You need to notify the work list, both that studies have some processing going on, when that study is ready to read, because you don't want to revisit a study twice, but also to be able to prioritize the reading of a study that has some urgent finding within it. Then we get onto the viewing. Rather than try and launch a separate viewer, we really focus on augmenting the existing PACS viewer. No radiologist wants to learn another interface or even open another window on another screen to be able to read a study. We then recognize that you need to contribute to the reporting, make the reporting very efficient, and pass that information into the EMR. And then there's the notifications to the referring physician. So all the way along this journey, we recognize there are interactions that are required. But again, I'll emphasize that we seek to augment, not replace, existing workflow. Why do we think we've got that right? Well, we have product in use at over 700 radiology sites. And we've seen all sorts of different setups, from the very large customers like RadNet down to individual imaging centers or radiology groups, alongside the usual mix of hospitals. We're often asked whether a product should be deployed in the cloud or on-premise, and we're absolutely agnostic on that. So we believe the really important piece is to be flexible and to make sure that whatever our customers want, we can support that. So sometimes that means that for the additional lumpy processing that's required for AI, it's better to use a cloud resource. But sometimes the site's security preferences mean that everything has to be handled on-premise. We can handle all of that. Of course, we're supported and we exist pretty much because of our platform partners. And we're adding more companies and more products to that list all the time. So we currently have 22 different FDA-approved products on the platform, and there are more coming. We also sell our product both direct and through channel partnerships, and we can talk about that. Okay, so if you are able to watch our recorded session, you'll be able to see presentations from each of our platform partners. And I'm delighted that now they're going to join us for a QA. I'm particularly grateful to welcome Don Dennison, who's going to facilitate that session. So over to you, Don.
Thanks, Ben. For those who may not know me, my name is Don Dennison. I'm a fellow of the College of SIIM, which means I've been hanging around for a long time. I'm a member also of the program committee. And I'm actually excited to moderate this QA session. I'm going to forego all the bios of our speakers today. I think if you watch the recorded session, which I highly advise you do, it becomes pretty clear that they are absolute experts in their field, and they know they know their field, they know their application. They also are able to very clearly articulate the specific value proposition and exactly how their applications are working. So I found it very enlightening, and I'm going to start off with a few observations for our group, and then I'll use that as kind of a launching point into some questions. 2-3 years ago, when AI-based applications were starting to come into the market, starting to get demonstrated at RSNA or other forums, I would see a lot of different deployment methods, how it was integrated, how images were getting to those algorithms. And in almost all the cases, it's like, oh, well, we just route all the CT data, we route all the MR data to us. And I started thinking, like, what if we have 20 of these things at a large academic institution? Now I got to route 20 copies of 5,000 CT studies to 5,000 caches, which all got to get managed, that have to be secured. And it just became unwieldy. And in addition to that, I could see also the coordination of that data. In other words, do all apps run in parallel and generate their own output? Or some apps make sense to pre-process some, and if you have a finding out of one, then daisy chain to the next one? How do we orchestrate the output of that? In other words, is the output to the diagnostic packs where the radiologist is going to use that information, or is this part of the record that goes to the electronic medical record? What form does that take? So there was a lot of, we'd have a lot of conversations. Where is this going to evolve? And a lot of the people on the hospital side I spoke to were very leery to say, we don't want to invest in one direction if the industry goes in a different direction. We're trapped on a certain path. And I wrote a blog post a bit about this. So I think it's very important for everyone to understand when we talk about a platform in general, from a deployment point of view. I think Ben pointed out a lot of those things, but also from a development point of view, and I'll ask a couple of you to comment on this shortly, is when you go to build a system, for every single app out there to build some kind of cache management and some kind of individual gateway and a separate logging app and a separate audit trail app and a separate compatibility with VMs, and there's so many parts of it that you have to start to kind of align, otherwise everyone is separated. And what I often run into, and this is common a lot of the SIIM members that I run into, is what I call app fatigue. They're already managing 50 apps on their enterprise, and the idea of managing another 10, 15 AI separate apps that their RADs are really interested in, are really keen on, and manage the upgrade of that and go through the InfoSec process and get procurement to finish their part. It's exhausting for them, and they're not excited about it, when in fact this is something that we should be excited about, this era that we're coming to. So that's a lot of the comments I want to start off with. Maybe, Ben, I'm actually going to start with you, and then we'll get into some of the others. You talked a lot about what the platform provides, both the apps that are sitting on it and also the person who's operating that. what's the future of these platforms? Like, where do you see 2 years from now? What is a platform going to take on or provide that today it doesn't yet or can't yet? What does it look like 2 years from now?
Sure. I think that the key thing for me is flexibility, right? We've been looking at cloud processing becoming the next big thing in radiology for a long time, in healthcare for a long time, and that shift hasn't happened. But it's happening. It's slowly starting. And I think that the current COVID situation has meant that people are much more comfortable about moving PHI around. I think that over time, applications and acceptance of processing will come to the cloud. At the moment, we need to have something that sits between. I think that the overall market for PACS, we saw deconstructed PACS really start to happen and then slow right back down again. Not quite sure where that's going to end up. I think that the future for platforms is more about making sure that whatever systems changes are going on, it can be absolutely smooth, both for the radiologist users, but also for the techs that need to send the data into this stuff, and also for the IT personnel that sit behind trying to make sense of all this and trying to keep the service operating while you're changing components pretty much underneath it. So I think that the key thing is flexibility. If you're talking about bigger functionality, bigger stuff, I mean, you can see where platforms have gone, right? So recommendation engines, being able to assess performance and train things as you go along. I think all of that is coming. I'm not sure if that's in a 2-year horizon or a bit longer.
Mm-hmm. Great. And when I watched the recorded session, I kind of had a preconceived notion that it was going to talk a lot about productivity, and there are some very clear productivity examples in there. But what struck me was how much many of these applications really dealt with what I call, like, I often see productivity and quality competing with each other, like try and cram as much through as you can, and then also do the best job you can, which often involves much more quantitative, extra steps, reading more clinical information, considering more things, doing more of those things. All the things as patients we really want, and as often as if you're in the financial side, you're looking at the productivity side. So I wanted to ask Ajit, you had made I'll start off with you, and you had talked a bit about productivity and as it related to scanner utilization. And I wanted to get you to maybe talk a little bit about what you're seeing there. But I also want to make, sorry for talking so much, one other comment. Ben, in your talk, you had mentioned about, we're going to come back and those 6 CT scanners. One thing I've been thinking about is, depending on how long this tail and the second wave and stuff, healthcare providers, I mean, if you take a look at a scanner, if you have to disinfect that thing completely, or you take 2 of your units and you move those out of the standard scheduling and use those only for known positive COVID patients because you're dealing with lung function scans or trying to quantify some of the data that the members are talking about, we may not get back to the same level of capacity, even, you know what I mean? Like when the demand is returned, we may not have the same supply because we have to allocate certain resources, staff, or those things. So maybe you can talk a little bit about where do you see modality productivity being enhanced through AI-based applications?
Yeah, thanks, Don, and thanks, Ben, for inviting us to this extremely useful panel discussion. One of the things we are actually kind of proposing is, the AI products which we have actually kind of developed. It's not on the analytics side, but on the front end of this acquisition, the radiology workflow, basically affecting the productivity and efficiency of the modalities. Essentially, our products are image enhancement algorithms, basically trained over large training data sets and stuff like that. But what it actually gives is an opportunity for the owners of the modality, the users, the hospitals, the imaging centers, to give that flexibility of optimizing their workflow from an acquisition perspective, whether it is scheduling, whether it is optimizing their imaging protocols, so that they can actually go through the capacity issue, which is going to happen, the crisis after the crisis, as Ben said, kind of take that into account. The other thing which we do feel very strongly is that, as you mentioned, some of these, most of these modalities will have some extremely rigid clinical, cleaning protocols basically implemented. So essentially, that will actually reduce the amount of time they can actually image. So having a tool which actually enhances the image quality gives you the flexibility to kind of play with the workflow and optimize their productivity. So we do see that it's an extremely important time basically for some of these AI applications to be in the field, being FDA approved, being implemented and deployed on platforms like Blackford, so that the users can actually kind of use that, especially now, post-COVID surge, and even with the second wave, basically, right? So these things are implemented, deployed, allows you to actually kind of, be more flexible in terms of how to optimize, and gives them the options to optimize their workflows, especially from the acquisition side.
That's fascinating. We're getting a few questions in. A lot of them are related to the platform, which I think could probably go more towards Ben, but I want to make sure we get some questions. So maybe Susan, I'll ask you a question just so you're prepped, start thinking about how you're going to answer. One of the things that struck me as I listened to a number of the talks that were in the recorded session was quantifying either how is COVID affecting an existing disease condition or an existing patient condition, and what's happening there, and also being able to look and quantify. We often we see these stats run by our ticker. So many people got COVID, so many people recovered, but when you look at it, people are getting double lung transplants. People are suffering from symptoms and other issues with their health well beyond. And so I think that recovery for many is not getting back to where it was. So I can, personally, I can see this need to really quantify the impact of COVID for people who are no longer COVID positive, but their body is not the same as it was before. So maybe Susan, you can talk, and then I'll ask somebody else to comment. What are you thinking? Like, where does AI play a role in trying to quantify a lot of this stuff, so that if this happens again or it comes back, what can we learn from all this quantified data?
Well, I think that VIDA has a unique role in analyzing the COVID patient, because the number one killer of COVID patients are progressive respiratory disease, and a lot of those patients have other underlying conditions that, when they have a chronic lung disease, for example, and then they're hit with a more acute phase of COVID, and they have sort of a accelerated response. But one thing that we do know is that with some parallel evidence is where patients with that recover from COVID, it is highly likely that they will need to be monitored over time for other respiratory conditions. So they'll have increased susceptibility to other respiratory conditions. So that cohort of patients will need to be continually monitored. So AI would play a role in finding the disease itself, certainly finding any underlying conditions that would accentuate the response to that disease, and then monitoring those patients over time for their increased susceptibility to other diseases.
Right. Great. And maybe Dirk, do you want to comment a bit on like where you see AI in this realm?
Yeah, interesting. It's like from the Icometrix perspective, we have something that we feel is very complementary with what VIDA is offering for lungs that we developed especially in the COVID period to detect and quantify lung involvement, detect COVID patients from non-COVID patients. This is something that is important, I think, when there are a lot of COVID patients around, or finding it as an incidental finding. I think that it's at baseline is important. But as Susan mentioned rightly, these patients need to be followed up on, and many of them get chronic disorders, lung disorders. What we also have learned in the meantime is that that COVID is not only leading to lung diseases, but also there appear to be also a link with the brain. We see, for example, more stroke cases happening. We see also some other changes in the brain happening. And for that, I think also there is a need for having quantitative brain solutions there. And that's still the core expertise of Icometrix, where we have applications for MS, dementia, stroke, TBI. And we expect that for some of these diseases, especially the ones that the neurodegenerative ones, the more chronic disorders, we expect that there will be a large increase in patients coming to the hospital. For example, MS patients normally get their scans every year, more or less, and many needed to cancel their appointments for the last couple of months. So we expect there a lot of patients to come in. And also there I see an important role for AI to quantify MS patients to pick up disease activity. There is a bit of a longer period probably for those patients compared to the previous visit. So it's even more important there to pick up disease activity to know whether they're still on the right drug, which is again also in the COVID and post-COVID period even more important because many of them are immunosuppressant medications. So we need to be very careful with them because there might be an interaction with COVID. Still to be researched a little bit, but this means that close follow-up now becomes very important for MS patients. These were just some examples of where AI also can play a role in the brain field.
Can I also say that that's a great advantage of the Blackford platform, is to be able to use and customize that approach and that integration from multiple areas of AI expertise in managing that patient.
Yep. We're getting a ton of great questions. I just wanted to pose one more question to Chris, and then I'm going to start reading. We're getting some questions, some great questions. Chris, so considering all this stuff, we have this capability to quantify this data. And, you know, many of us in radiology have been lamenting at the fact that radiology is a late adopter to quantify data compared to, say, well, specifically breast imaging within radiology and then cardiac and others. Is this going to be, like COVID has changed much of life, is this going to be the time where we start to take that structured data and it starts to become kind of a standard of care within health systems? And also part B to that is, where do you see this happening if we start to get, you know, I go to health system A and you go to health system B, we both run different algorithms, different processes. Like, how do we know, or if I go to two different health systems who are using two different systems and one says one thing, one says another, how do we start to deal with you know, conflicting outputs or competing outputs for these type of things?
Thanks, Don. Great questions. For the first part, you know, we've been pushing this at CorTechs Labs, trying to get quantitative neuroimaging to become standard of care for about the last 12 years now. We've definitely seen increased momentum, you know, certainly over the past 5 or 6, 7 years, to the point that in, you know, dementia cases, and as Dirk mentioned previously in MS, we're seeing a, you know, very strong acceptance of quantitative imaging in the neuroradiology field. Definitely room to grow, and we absolutely want to see this become kind of across the board standard of care. The advantages, you know, from a workflow perspective, from a standardization perspective, you're getting you know, standardization across readers with objective volumetric data that could be tracked over time for a particular patient. These are huge advantages that this type of quantitative solution offers, and I think it's definitely going to become increasingly important with caseloads and other operational challenges we're facing post-COVID, or during COVID and beyond, obviously. As far as Part B goes, certainly we hope that there's a strong conformance between the various solutions available. We know there are many providers that do similar things to each other. We've had you know, some symposia where various vendors come in and you know, provided with difficult cases and sort of a challenge. We did this in Paris last summer. We saw a very strong congruence between the different vendors in terms of volumetric outputs provided. So I think over time, we're definitely going to settle on, hopefully solutions that become mainstream are definitely providing robust data that can be compared across health systems and institutions.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. We've got thanks for all your responses. We've got a bunch of questions coming in here. The first one's from Dr. Elliot Siegel. Does Blackford have a mechanism for ensemble or collaborative applications? For example, could one or more long nodule detection programs form a consensus to further improve accuracy? So can you crowdsource multiple AI to come up with an answer on a complex case?
Sure. So first of all, the simple answer is yes, of course, we can have a single study going to multiple different solutions and then bring those answers back. I think, though, that I want to be quite careful there, that where we're looking at commercial products, typically the radiology group, the hospital, the imaging center that's purchasing that solution is doing that because they've done a full evaluation and they've determined that this is the thing to do. So I think that in a research configuration, we recently made a sale into the National Institutes of Health, where that kind of operation is indeed going on. That's appropriate. Where you're looking at multiple commercial algorithms, in most facilities, someone has to pay for those, and they tend to want to pay for the one that's going to deliver the answer that they feel is appropriate for their setting. So I think it's an important question for a research organization, and the platform can handle that. But in a marketplace of FDA-regulated apps, I think that most facilities would want to have a solution that delivers that particular answer rather than pay for three at once.
Right. So some other questions, and thanks for that, Ben. Has there been any discussion among platforms of cross-platform exchange of information? For example, could a single user in an institution have more than one platform and have the ability to choose applications from, say, platform B that aren't on platform A in an automated fashion? Or can one platform deliver applications available on another platform? How about coordination with existing platforms such as, and then they list a number of like advanced visualization systems on the market. So I think this is really a question about, am I committing to one platform? And if I have more than one platform, or am I really locking into two separate vaults or tracks, and then I can't use the data across those kind of thing?
So let me answer that in a couple of different ways, which isn't me shirking, but I think, first of all, there's no reason why you couldn't deploy multiple platforms at a site, right? At their heart, they can collect ICOM information, they process it, they find ways to get that back to the user and propagate it through either visualization, reporting, or going down to the referrer via the EHR. So there's no technical reason why you can't do that. Again, I'll come back to a kind of a research environment versus a commercial environment, where if you think back to that slide where we want to deploy a product, well, you deploy a platform, and that takes effort and energy and resource. So if you're trying to administer a radiology practice, do you want to deploy 3 different platforms to be able to post stuff from one platform to another? Or actually, do you want to focus on one platform that does the job? So I think, again, in a research environment, I can see where you're trying to bring lots of different algorithms together. We're really focused on products that deliver answers. Now, there's no reason why we can't connect with other platforms, but I think that a lot of the value for a radiology site goes down if you're trying to deploy multiple ones. In terms of interoperability, though, we focus on doing things that are really bedded into DICOM. So whatever the PACS is, we can work with that PACS. Now, we have a number of PACS that we have channel partner relationships with, which allow you to go even faster in terms of the deployment, because we can go in on their paper. We can basically be up and running very quickly because we're going through on their IT security audit. We're fitting within their rules and their regulations and their business associate agreement. So in that case, I think that some of the partners that Dr. Siegel mentioned, we are already channel partners through. So we can go in there and work with them already. Obviously, we're open to more of those channel partnerships because it fundamentally allows us to get product into the user's hands much more quickly.
Great. And we've got just a ton of great questions here, so I probably won't be able to get to them all, so I apologize to some. So I'm going to do some rapid fire, and I'll ask our panel to try to keep their answer brief. And I'll kind of pick ones that I think the answers can be covered quickly. This is from Dr. Prevedello. A key component to the success of AI applications in the clinical setting relates to how well integrated these tools are with existing imaging systems. The tighter the integration, the higher the chances it will be used and contribute to patient care. What are some of the challenges and opportunities you see on that front? Maybe I'll start with Ajit.
Yeah, so I think there are pros and cons of tighter integration with a vendor, especially in the apps which Subtle actually kind of puts out there. Because we are DICOM based, as Ben said, it actually gives us the flexibility to work with any of the vendors. Basically, any imaging system, the images come to us, they are all in the standard DICOM format, and we can actually process that. So it actually gives the flexibility for the users because they may have a fleet of scanners, whether it is Siemens, GE, or Hitachi, or some of the older scanners or the newer scanners. And it is easier for us to support all the scanners within that fleet, providing them that the output from the AI algorithm. The tighter integration, I agree that it can be used much more from a vendor perspective, but it actually kind of restricts to a specific vendor if we do the tighter integration. And from our perspective, that is going to be a downside. There's going to be a downside when it goes to a fleet of, when it goes to an imaging center which has fleet of scanners, basically. So there are pros and cons. You have to take a path, and what we have taken is to be more agnostic from a vendor perspective, whether it is for example, for the MR algorithm, it is agnostic from a field strength perspective, whether it is an older scanner or a newer scanner software version perspective, as well as the vendor perspective. So I would say there are pros and cons, but we have chosen the path to actually be little bit more loosely integrated from a vendor perspective.
Thanks for that. I'm going to jump into another one, and maybe I'll start with Chris, and then I'll go to Dirk. I'm going to combine two questions here. One is from Dr. Tobin, another one from Dr. Coley. They're not really related, but they kind of can be addressed, I think, at the same time. So Dr. Tobin's asking, how do we ensure that the data is presented to the person who needs it in the electronic system that that person uses? For example, how do you present a risk assessment to a front desk clerk or radiography technologist? And Dr. Coley asks, do any of your integrations allow for discrete data to flow into the EHR? For example, what if we wanted to display brain volumes in the EHR as a flow sheet row, like a lab test or trending over time? So I'll start with Chris and then go on to Dirk, and Susan will come back to you. So really it's like, how are we getting out to these systems that people are already using, and how are we getting data out of them, and how are we getting data into them, right, without having, like, within radiology, everybody can launch another app, and it's one more viewer, one more processing thing, one more form. But in these other areas, they use a lot fewer systems than we do. So maybe talk about that in general.
Right, certainly. Thanks, Don. That's something that we spend a lot of time working on, is trying to make sure that we're delivering the data back to the people that need it in the format they need it. Like Ajit with Subtle, CorTechs does work with DICOM standard for most of the file transfer protocols. So we exist in we fit into the existing workflow as tightly as possible. The workflow typically, we try to make sure that we have all data processing done by the time the patient is off the table. So everything should be back into the packs for the radiologist to read, and this includes all of the reformatted MR series with color segmentations, as well as the volumetric reports. These reports would be used, potentially for dictating, and also to actually return back to the referring physician, so that they can use those to graphically discuss results with their patients if desired. We also do populate data directly into PowerScribe 360 with Nuance's PowerScribe 360. And so with templates that we provide, we can, any of the data from any of our analyses can be populated automatically into PowerScribe 360 so that that templated data is available immediately and propagate back to the EMR from there.
Okay. Thanks. Jörg, do you have in terms of capturing data in from these other applications or getting data into them, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I think I follow Chris here in the sense that processing should be done in the background, so all data is available in standard formats at the moment that the radiologist starts reading. In our case, that's also everything in DICOM. We have also the opportunity to send data back as HL7 messages for further integration to the HR, or PDFs to share, for example, with other parties, or pre-populated reporting templates, very similar to Chris, is also provided back in multiple formats to allow a deeper integration, for example, as well with the PowerScribe 360, but also with other sources to have them deeply integrated. Because in the end, we don't want, or radiologists do not want to lose time with finding where they need to find the information. So it should be at the right moment, at the right place, and interoperability is key there.
Great. Great. And then, sorry, Susan, did you want to add on to that? There's a question here I'm going to pose to you.
So I think that my response is similar, but I would say, bringing it back to sort of the bigger picture is that we have the information that we incorporated into the incumbent standards that are available to us, so we can deploy the AI information in an optimized and customizable way where people need it. So I think that is similar to the other responses, but that's the advantage we have, that we can use these available standards.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I'm actually going to come back to you on one. This is from Dr. Tobin, a lot of our current challenges are not in diagnostics, but rather operations. How can AI help us to better utilize our resources, both human and physical? Susan?
Is that to me?
Yeah, I left you to the end, so I'm going to give you another shot to come back. Sorry.
I think that the AI in operations. So I assume that means we're tackling this information overload in different phases. So this is kind of the next generation, and I think one of the ways we tackle that is obviously with efficiency. So operationally, we're looking to, with our lung print discovery, we have focused a very complex search field in the branching tree structures of the lung, and have brought that search down to a level of concision that it's much more easily consumable by that radiologist. And in doing that, have reduced the reading time by as much as 35%. So operationally, that gives you back some time. What you do with it, I think, depends on the department, but that's one way of focusing on the operational component, as well as, with that AI-driven workflow, combining that with the automation of finding disease in a repeatable way. So that's your quality component you're bringing in as well.
Right. And so we're at about 3-4 minutes here. I'm going to wrap up with a question here, and maybe I'll send it to Ben, and if somebody else wants to jump in. This is from Dr. Geis. We're realizing we have to monitor algorithm quality very frequently, or even ideally continuously, for every machine. Each imaging machine has its own fingerprint of pixel acquisition and reconstruction. What's your take on this? How can you help us do that? What happens if we start to use ensembles of algorithms in parallel? Not available now, but we believe it will go in that direction. So Ben?
Yeah, I think the key thing for me is to work out what is R&D and what is production, right? For me, there are many academic centers that have fantastic leaps forward with really exciting homegrown AI, and I think that's fantastic. I think, though, that if you're starting to sell a product, it needs to be regulatory approved, and that regulatory approval gives you some confidence that those processes are all going on. So I think that you need a robust monitoring system in place when you have that regulatory approval, and you need to be absolutely driving that to make sure that the quality isn't impaired. So you can monitor feedback for algorithms, you can make sure that you're passing all the support information back to these clinical application partners. But ultimately, that's really where regulatory approval comes in. And that's why, as a platform, we will only distribute products that have appropriate regulatory approval.
Great. So were there any other last comments? Because I think we're almost up on time. There's still a lot of great questions, and I apologize we couldn't get to them all. I appreciate everybody's contribution.
I'll comment on the last question if we have our 2 minutes.
Sure.
You know, I think that to kind of reinforce what Ben is said in his last response, you know, academic research and commercialization are kind of two ends of a product development spectrum. And if you look at it like an analogy to a pharmaceutical trial, discovery is important, right? But these are phase 1 type discoveries. To get that into clinical practice, you need many iterations to get it to reinforce, to validate, to bring it to scale. And if you put into clinical practice these early phase analyses, you're going to get a lot of noise in your output. And I think that, as Ben says, he's trying to minimize the noise in the applications that he's putting on the platform.
Right. We're almost up on time. I wanted to thank all of our panelists, both for the recorded session. You all did an excellent job. I learned a ton, and I want to thank Ben for inviting me to moderate this. This has been really exciting. I have seen from staff that they were able to capture all these questions, and it might be very interesting to do a short paper on this with some of these questions distilled down to kind of a framework. The reason is that everybody I talked to is really trying to get to the answer of how is this going to evolve. I want to get started, but I don't want to paint myself into a corner. And I think you've all done a great job of explaining where you see things coming and being honest with the challenges that we're all facing. So I want to thank you for that. And with that, we'll conclude our session. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the rest of SIIM.
Thanks, Don. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks, Don.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right. Thanks, Don.